Hey, good evening. Good evening. I think I'm live. Cindy Baker here. I'm an ADHD productivity coach and coming to you live this Monday night with some more tips. We're actually going to talk about how ADHD affects perfectionism. So, even if you don't have ADHD, this is a subject. Perfectionism is just something that a lot of people struggle with. So, let me do a little tech check here and make sure I am streaming to my group. Not sure what's happening here. Hold on just a minute. Well, if you're jumping on live, if you could let me know if you can see or hear me, that would be awesome because I can't pull it up on my phone. Um, okay, there I am. There I am. Awesome. So if you're watching live, let me know in the chat. Tell me where you're tuning in from. And if you're watching the replay, I know a lot of people watch the replay, then let me know that too. Just put hashtag replay and I'll circle back and read those comments. If you hear something that you like, you agree with or disagree with or have a question about, just put some things in the chat because it is much more fun if it's interactive. So hi, Debbie. Glad you're in the Focus and Flow group. I don't know why. I thought we had welcomed you, but for some reason, uh, I just wanted to make sure. So, if you're watching on YouTube or somewhere else, say something in the comments to let me know what you think about this topic because I'm open to suggestions. But we're going to talk about how ADHD influences perfectionism. So even if you don't have ADHD, I think this will be interesting because we're going to talk about what you can do about it. So here's the kind of the driving question. You know, I'm a teacher, and we always have to have this essential question in our lessons every day. So the question is your need for perfectionism affecting your productivity? Because unhealthy perfectionism can drive you to exhaustion, really, because you're striving to reach your own unrealistic expectations. Anybody relate to that? So put an emoji in the chat, even if you're watching the replay, and let me know if you think of yourself as a perfectionist or that you tend to be that way. Because it can actually be a form of obsession for some people. And some perfectionist traits could actually stem from ADHD. And it can be a way to try and like overcompensate for all the ways that we've messed up in the past. Or maybe we're, just compensate for not feeling good enough. Perfectionism results from a need for control. It's really about control. Nobody wants to be thought of as a control freak, but it doesn't mean you're a control freak, but you do need to understand the connection because it's this overwhelming fear of the uncertainty that can exist in uncontrolled situations, and we don't like that. And so it can lead a person to adopt these paralyzingly rigid roles like an armor against all of life's uncertainties, And perfectionism can also become a defense against the chaos that we feel of impulsivity. That's a trait of ADHD, and also weak executive functioning. Executive functions in your brain, that's like memory, especially short-term memory, organization, planning skills, things like that. So that struggle comes with ADHD. So letting go of perfectionism does not mean eliminating. Whoa, sorry, dog scared me to death. I don't know if you heard that, but she saw someone out the window and now she's charging downstairs. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, what was I saying? Letting go of perfectionism, it does not mean that you're getting rid of worries around mistakes or failure or judgment. It just means that you accept that they're part of life for everybody and that they can help us grow. Um, you can't be insulated against all uncertainty in your life. So, if you're a true perfectionist, that's really an unhealthy obsession with flawlessness that causes people to set these unattainable personal standards, and they compare themselves to others and they never quite feel good enough. And so they're always trying to be perfect. And it can make us overly like super sensitive to criticism, even constructive criticism. And it can increase anxiety and other mental health conditions. Um, and in fact, according, what is the Yeah, Americans APA. What is that? American Psychological Association. That's what that stands for. Um, Perfectionism. That's it's a tendency to demand of others or of yourself extremely high or even a flawless level of performance. And the way they word it is above and beyond what is required by the situation. So it's an extreme. And there's some strong connections between ADHD and perfectionism. Like I said, it could be overcompensation for past ADHD related mistakes or for feelings of like inferiority or something like that. And for other people, it's a form of kind of almost like self punishment, or even we use it as an excuse for procrastinating because we're waiting for like the perfect conditions before we can get started. But it's about incorrectly estimating the demands of a task or a situation. Um, Misunderstanding when to let things go and the inability of getting the resources to help you cope with what you see as a challenge. So, does that make sense? Um, so, being less of a perfectionist begins with self awareness, really, and adopting strategies to get rid of patterns of anxiety and all like negative self talk, things like that. Um, so, if you're watching in the chat, do you see yourself as a perfectionist? Perfectionism, FOMO, when I'm doing research topic on. Oh, yes. I can relate to that, Debbie. um, well, perfectionism can come out in different ways. You've got like, for instance, you've got this all or nothing thinking. They call it a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset. And it's like believing that mistakes represent personal unchangeable flaws. Like all you're perfect or you're a failure. There's nothing in between. Um, it can come out in setting unrealistic standards for yourself and other people. Um, Maybe it manifests with you being too picky, having difficulty making decisions, um, avoiding commitments, missing out on opportunities because you're waiting for perfection, and just general unhappiness. Because being a perfectionist does not make you happy. You might be guarded in relationships. Maybe you constantly worry and have like ruminations where you go over and over things in your head. Maybe you compare yourself with other people negatively, feeling like you don't measure up. Um, Kind of along with that comes self-criticism, negative self-talk. Um, I had a coach tell me once, don't should on yourself. SHOULD, should. So you're living, if you're a perfectionist, you're living by shoulds. You're shoulding all over yourself. um, and definitely procrastination. Perfectionism and procrastination go hand in hand because you want to avoid failure, you want to avoid discomfort. So perfectionists delay tasks big time, put them off. Um, Maybe there's a fear or reluctance to ask for help. People who are perfectionists are overly sensitive to feedback. They're defensive, you know. They could be easily discouraged um, because, they don't have perfect results. So that throws them for a loop. Fear of social rejection, low self esteem, all this kind of stuff. Um, so it doesn't always manifest in an obvious way, but all of those things that I mentioned, the root could be perfectionism. So I'm going to talk about three main types of perfectionism and what you can do about it. First, you've got like the self-oriented perfectionist. That's a person who puts unrealistic, irrational standards on themselves. Um, and they kind of have this punitive mindset when they're evaluating themselves. That that type of perfectionist makes the person vulnerable to a lot of mental health diagnosis, like generalized anxiety disorder or depression, um, eating disorders, things like that. But then you've got the second kind is a socially prescribed perfectionism, and so that's when that's associated with beliefs that other people are harshly judging and criticizing you. Um, so instead of you being hard on yourself, you imagine that everyone else is. And so with that type, you may think that you have to be perfect to get approval or acceptance from other people. And and that type too can be connected to social anxiety. Um, and then you've got the other oriented perfectionism, and that's like when you're hard on other people. You're associated. It's got associated with imposing rigid, unrealistic standards on other people. And people with that type might evaluate other people critically. Um, they're slow to forgive other people. They don't have empathy, and as a result, a lot of times they struggle with all kinds of relationships. But at its core, perfectionism is related to anxiety. So, anxiety doesn't like discomfort and it doesn't like uncertainty. So it tried to make the resulting feelings of fear and worry go away immediately by being perfect. So is this resonating with anybody? I know we don't have that many people on live tonight, but if you're watching the replay, let me know what your thoughts are on this. Have you ever really connected perfectionism and anxiety? Because perfectionism, it's maladaptive. It's an inefficient coping mechanism for handling anxiety. Perfectionists try to avoid a possible disappointment, and they try to avoid being embarrassed, potential embarrassment, or what they feel is inevitable punishment or judgment when they make a mistake. um, and so to prevent stress and reduce insecurity, perfectionists create all these rules and these rigid standards that they've got to meet to feel worthwhile. Um, but high standards like that come with cost. If they're difficult to meet, you can end up fueling even more anxiety, and it creates this vicious cycle. So, in adults with ADHD, the rates of anxiety disorder can be as high as 50%, and symptoms tend to be more severe when ADHD is involved. So, anxiety and perfectionism are linked. Um, there's there's several things that they have in common. They got the fear of failure, fear of disappointing others. People with ADHD a lot of times have moments when they're struggling or they know they've missed the mark in some way and they don't know how to fix it, and that creates just persistent worries. It's kind of like a low level anxiety. The perfectionism often comes from trying to avoid unpleasant or embarrassing outcomes. And so setting unrealistic or impossible standards of performance is another connection between anxiety and perfectionism. A lot of people with ADHD blame themselves for things that aren't even their fault. Or they beat themselves up for small mistakes that everybody makes. And then you get that all or nothing thinking, if it's not perfect, then it's a failure. Um, Constant comparison to other people. People with ADHD a lot of times will negatively compare themselves to neurotypical peers. They've got sensitivity to criticism. Um, and sometimes, you might have heard of rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD. It's like they're overly sensitive, easily discouraged by setbacks. It can be hard to begin again if the initial motivation was hard to begin with. It's hard to get going again. We could have a whole nother talk just about that. Um, Perfectionists, like if you try to give them a compliment, they reject praise, or like they believe they don't really deserve success, kind of shrug it off. And they depend on other people's opinions for validation and approval. Um, so, and you know, let's talk some more about that procrastination, because putting things off, that's a challenge for people with ADHD. And it often happens when something seems like too hard, or it's going to take too much effort, or it just seems incredibly boring. So you do have a perfectionism procrastination. And that's when you can't get started on something unless you've got idealistic conditions. That those conditions have to be in place. These special conditions that are going to keep you from making mistakes and reduce future shame and embarrassment. And then you've got avoidance procrastination. That's when you put things off if they're difficult. Um, and it just adds to the pressure when you put things off. Um, and sometimes you'll think you're being productive, but you're really procrastinating on the thing that you need to be doing. It's like a delay tactic. So, um, so what do we do about it? You have to be aware. Be aware, first of all. Look at your perfectionism, kind of like standing on the outside, looking at it with curiosity, and ask yourself, what standard are you trying to meet, and why? And what's the underlying worry? And then how can you shift that? Like, what's going on in your head before the perfectionism kicks in? Do you need to feel accepted or good enough? Do you need praise? Because those are desires that are underneath perfectionism, and they go along with having ADHD. So if you're an entrepreneur like me, you've probably heard of the term imposter syndrome, where you're always worried that you're not quite good enough. Fear of failure. You think, well, I would be so embarrassed if people found out that I'm not really as together as I appear, or whatever. Or you think if you make a mistake that you're just a bad person, you know. So when you're a perfectionist, if you make a mistake, you're expecting people to reject you, and that is like a false belief that we're somehow deficient. And that's what I hear a lot of times as I work with people with ADHD. So you have to be aware of that, and you got to talk supportively to yourself. Cindy, we all make mistakes. This doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're doing your best. Sometimes it's not going to work out. That's okay. Um, you know, Talk to yourself logically like that, and shift the focus. Um, in my coaching program, I encourage, we just had a call last night, and I encourage everyone to share a win from the week. And I do that because it's so easy for them to share struggles. But when I ask them to share a win, they have to think, because we're not used to paying attention to what's working. We're only used to paying attention to what's not working. So you got to notice the good. You have to celebrate your progress, and you have to do that more than you notice the challenges. So you've got to flip it around, because research shows that positivity and gratitude can can change your mindset permanently. So you have to learn to enjoy small achievements just as much as big, going for perfection. And I know that's hard for perfectionists, but you can practice it. You can learn to set more accurate expectations for yourself, because you start appreciating the little things, and then you start to notice how they add up, and it adds up to a larger sense of self worth. Another thing I would just add is to stop comparing your insides to other people's outsides. When you're scrolling on social media, people are putting their best, and you really don't know what's going on the inside. So they call it compare and despair. A lot of people will hide their worries and their fears. So don't assume that they're in a better place because they look more put together or they act more put together than you are. Instead of looking sideways, look briefly back to see how far you've come, and then focus on forward, to see where you're going. And when you make a mistake, you learn from it. It's part of life. A fixed mindset limits you to believe that mistakes represent some kind of personal flaw. But everybody makes mistakes. And so if you have a growth mindset, um, like if you're a recovering perfectionist, then you know that you can make a mistake and it's okay. Um, you can pick yourself up, you can try again. So you got to be kind to yourself and avoid that harsh self-talk. Um, receive feedback with grace. When people try to give you a compliment, try to accept what you hear. Kind of just be more neutral, and uh, examine it. Is there any truth to what you hear? Are you the kind of person that dismisses compliments? Maybe you need to work on that, because that can be a sign of perfectionism. Um, so just to acknowledge that feedback is just feedback. Um, it isn't part of your self-worth. It's just something that you can kind of hold out objectively and examine, and take the good, throw away the rest, But your goal is to stay present, avoid being defensive, and kind of stop that shame spiral that gets triggered sometimes with critical feedback. Um, it's okay that you're not perfect. It's okay that somebody noticed that you're not perfect, right? So you have to use your own compass to determine what's possible and start to think about what you can handle, rather than just, raising the bar so high that you're just going to frustrate yourself. So, um, what are you guys thinking about all this? Debbie says, I don't handle compliments well. Yeah, it's common. It's very common. So, set limits, differentiate your goals. Um, if the executive function skills are tied to perfectionism, you can improve that. Um, put these tips into place. I know a great coaching program that you could try, uh, mine, and work on things like time management and organization, and improve in the areas that you need to improve in, instead of just beating yourself up for not being perfect. Um, so there's a lot more we could say about all of this, um, but the key is to the key is to accept yourself where you are, instead of being upset that you're not somewhere else, if that makes sense. And let people know you. Don't try to, it takes a lot of energy to wear a mask and try to have this image and keep up this image all the time. Just it's exhausting, really. So it's not like you want to go around and like wear your heart on your sleeve and, you know, tell everybody all your deepest, darkest. I'm not talking about that. I just mean you need to be okay if someone catches you making a mistake, because guess what? They make mistakes too. And so surround yourself with supportive people who understand you and get you. Um, the ADHD Facebook group that you're in, I mean, we're all in this together. And, if someone um, wants to, um, I don't know, ask a question or anything like that, it's a supportive group. So you're in the right place. And I want you to let go of that perfectionism. If there's something you're procrastinating on because you're waiting for things to be perfect so that you can avoid all mistakes 100%, I have a little mantra that I say in my coaching program, and that is done beats perfect. You don't have to get it perfect, you just have to get it going. And it's much better to do something and make a small mistake than to sit around and wait for everything to be perfect and never get anything done. So that's my 2 cents worth for this Monday. And I hope that you have a great week. Um, it's not going to be a perfect week, but it's going to be a good one. And so I will see you next time. Bye.